Hey, Steve Mignani here doing the junkyard crawl at Berniston Auto Wrecking in Berniston, Massachusetts with the 1984 Pontiac Fiero. This is the first of 5 model years, 1984 through 88, that the Fiero was in production. Now keep in mind that Chevrolet, the Camaro team, or excuse me, the Corvette team was really concerned when they heard word that Pontiac was coming up with a plastic-bodied 2-seat sports car. They said, "You're going to compete with our Corvette. What are you thinking?" Pontiac said, "Hold on, calm down. We're going to build ours as a smaller vehicle with 4-cylinder or 6-cylinder power. It's going to be sold and marketed as a sporty commuter car. Don't worry, Corvette, we're not coming after you." And thus General Motors allowed these to exist. Now, a total of 370,168 of these were made between 84 and 88. And this one is a first-year example. We know that because on the back it says Fiero 2M4. That's something you won't find on any 85, 86, 87, or 88. That's because 2 means 2-seat, mid-engined, 4-cylinder engine. Now in 84, the first year, yes, the 2.5-liter Iron Duke pushrod engine was the only engine you could get. Next year in 85, the V6 came along. That would have made this the 2M6. So Pontiac dropped the 2M4 thing. But 84, always 4-cylinder engines. Now here's the thing. The statistics tell us that something like 20 fires every month were occurring with Fieros. And that means that roughly 1 in every 508 cars was catching fire. Why? Well, here's why. This is the Iron Duke 4-cylinder engine. This engine was designed to take the place of the Vega aluminum 2.3 liter. Now the Vega, of course, arrived in 1970. The aluminum engine had no liners, and sadly they started to burn oil within 20,000 miles. So Pontiac was tasked with the job of coming up with a 4-cylinder replacement for the Vega and the Monza to replace the aluminum engine in 1975 or so. This is it, the Iron Duke 2.5 liter engine. It's a good engine, but the emphasis on the word iron was intentional. These were sold as the Iron Duke because the public had a sense that the Vega's aluminum 4-banger was very unreliable. So Pontiac and General Motors and Chevrolet wanted to say, this is the Iron Duke engine. Now, of course, being an iron engine, the wear characteristics are excellent, but it's also heavy. It's a Stone Age pushrod engine. Nothing exotic about it. Got rocker arms. Not much of an engine, really. 92 horsepower in this case here with the fuel injection. In fact, let's take a peek at the throttle body. There it is right there. And this is the electric injector. Here's the air door, and it's electronic fuel injection. No carburetors ever on the Fiero. Now here's the thing. The reason for those fires was not because of any particular plastic bodied routine. In fact, these are made of SMC, which is sheet molded plastic. And in fact, you can actually see the trunk lid here is fiberglass, and you can see the hairs right here, just like certain Corvette body panels, but there's also SMC sheet molded plastic on these. And these actually are not plastic cars. They have a steel cage and inner structure. These can actually be driven without the skin on them. The skin is not structural. So that's the weird thing. They're not really plastic, nor was the Corvette for that matter. But that didn't burn. What did happen was, because the engine went in here transverse on this particular platform, the oil pan held 3 quarts of oil, not 4, as it might have like in a J2000 front-wheel drive passenger car. So what happened was folks would run these things low on oil, and then they also had fairly weak connecting rods. They would kick a rod, and then that hot oil would get onto the exhaust manifold and start a fire. But again, it was something that only happened in 4-cylinder cars, and again, something like 1 in every 508 Fieros caught fire. That was a statistic reality. This didn't catch fire, but the other side of the coin is when they brought the V6 into play in 1986, 7, and 8, it was mounted so tight that the inboard spark plugs were unchangeable without dropping the engine cradle. So you pick your poison with these things. Now this has 92 horsepower, but here's the deal. This is Car and Driver right here. This is the April 1984 issue. In itself a classic issue, revisiting 20 years later, the GTO versus GTO with no other than Dan Gurney doing the driving. And of course, in this one here, there was no Jim Wanger's 421 Ringer. The real GTO beat the snot out of the old one, but it was still a cool redo. But the reason we're looking at this is because here on page 93, the Pfaf Turbo Fiero. And a company called Pfaf, what they did is they sold a turbocharger kit. We can see it here up on the top right. And that bumped power from 92 up to 145, which, you know, did the job. But again, it wasn't a Pontiac item. It was an aftermarket piece. So, you know, again, Band-Aid engineering. When the aftermarket has to step in and make your car cool, it's not a good sign. But anyway, these could have been excellent cars. But here's the problem. These were what you might call parts bin engineered. The rear engine cradle from these things is right out of the Chevy Citation, which is to say, if you looked under these things, they have steering knuckles, they have tie rod ends, all that stuff is there. It's just locked straight ahead, which is to say, you know, there's not much engineering going on here. Now, the 88 Fiero did have its own suspension with wishbones, good stuff. Although up front, these had Chevette or Pontiac T1000 front suspension. But the good news is that meant disc brakes front and rear. But again, the front suspension in this thing is Pontiac T1000 or Chevy Chevette, which is Chevy's little front engine rear wheel drive micro car. But again, the plastic bodies on these things was, you know, innovative in its time, doesn't rust, but that doesn't mean that the inner structure, well, that's made of steel and that can rust. But this one does have the optional 14-inch aluminum wheels. The base wheels on these, I remember very well, was just basically a steel wheel with little tiny holes and an ugly little black hubcap in the middle. They almost punished you for being frugal. And these cars base priced at around $7,000, which was a quarter of roughly what a Corvette would be in this time. So these were not competing with Corvettes, but they were nearly as sporty if you didn't care about going fast. Inside, kind of cool, you know, 2 seats. Obviously, there's no back seat in these things. The center tunnel is huge. This one's a 4-speed manual. And there was a version of this with a, I believe, a 308 axle ratio that could get 50 miles per gallon. The EPA actually rated it 50 miles per gallon on the highway with the 4-speed manual. Now, no 5 speeds in these things till I think 1987. So the 4-speed was the cool one. There was also an automatic, but something cool making use of the space is the speakers for the stereo are in the headrest of the bucket seats. Kind of a cool touch. And in fact, a lot of folks, not so much now, but they used to grab Fiero seats, put them in their hot rods, their Camaros, whatever, because the stereo speakers were right there at your ears. But that's how Pontiac engineers solved the space, lack of space issue. And they made the speakers do dual jobs. Kind of cool here inside. The center stack does have the optional AM/FM cassette player radio. And remember cassettes, I remember they were kind of a pain because the tape would get stuck. You'd have to get a pencil and rewind it and all that kind of stuff, but pretty well preserved inside. This does not have the optional sun top or sunroof. But again, this is basically the Pontiac Fiero. Now here's the thing, Fiero does not mean fireball. Again, 1 in every 500 Fieros did catch fire, but rather Fiero is Italian for aggressive, you know, tough, mean. And, you know, they kind of were. Again, 1988 was the year that Pontiac really got the Fiero right with tubular control arms and the 2.8 V6 with a little more power. There was talk of a 3.1 liter V6, but they pulled the plug on the Fiero. In fact, there were prototypes of 89s and 90s that were around the GM Proving Grounds when I saw them back when I was at Hot Rod, and they were pretty cool. There's a 4-door Fiero prototype that still exists. Crazy stuff. They were thinking about 4-doors. But this is the 84, the very first, the debut of the Fiero dynasty. But again, 370,000 of these things and change were sold, which is far more than Corvettes at this point in time. So they were successful, but again, only 5 model years, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, and the party was over. Speaking of the party being over, I think this one is probably a little too far gone. It's got pretty bad frame rust. But with that said, a lot of good parts on this thing. And, you know, I don't get in the middle of this stuff, but everything here at Bernardston Auto Wrecking is for sale. Just Google Bernardston Auto Wrecking, ask for Dale, and work a deal if you want to. Or just watch the videos and enjoy them vicariously, which is the smart thing to do. That's what I do. So be sure to subscribe to the Steve Magazine YouTube channel and stick around for more.